All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Fireside Chat series, Tech Leaders in Focus, brought to you by Scalable Leaders. First of all, I'd like to begin with an Australian custom. I'd like us to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we're all on, and I'd like to pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. Now, what is this series about, and what can you expect from the next hour? Over the last few years, there has been a realization that transitioning to leadership roles is harder in tech. The gap between where our leadership skills are and where they need to be by the time we transition from ICs to leaders in engineering, design, data, even product, there's just a really large gap because we don't hone those interpersonal leadership skills as much as people in sales, marketing, and HR during their individual contributor career. As a result, many of us feel stuck or stressed by the time we make that transition, and even many years after. At Scale Leaders, we focus on giving leaders that extra support to unlock their potential, fast-track their growth, and avoid the burnout. And it's a support system that is designed to be the fastest way for leaders in tech to level up. Now, in this series of Fireside Chats, we are talking to established leaders in our tech ecosystem, and we wanted to demystify the journey of what it looks like to actually become a leader and then become established, shine light on common mistakes, and understand how leaders are managing the demands of their roles today. Whether you're joining us live or catch up after, do feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we will go into an open Q&A session at the end or look at those questions afterwards. Now, I've got with me Cheryl Gledhill, who is a director of product at CultureAmp. Welcome, Cheryl. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what your role is and what that means on a day-to-day basis?
Great. Thanks, Ben. So hi, I'm Cheryl. I am Director of Product at CultureAmp, which is an HR tech that is improving the world of work for millions of people. So I look after the talent space. So that is, we've got a product around individual development plans. We've got competency frameworks and career pathways, which leads to internal mobility. And we've got an effectiveness product, which is both a 360 and a 180 feedback to create better leaders and better managers. So on a day-to-day basis, I mean, it really does change daily. At the moment, we're kind of deep into Q1 planning. So literally this morning, I came out of a trade-off conversation of saying, we've got our roadmap for the next quarter, but this other team wants something on our roadmap. So kind of going through those conversations, it's diving deep into the metrics. This morning was looking at, churn and the different revenue from different companies. So it changes day by day, but right now it's a combination of, I guess, looking forward over the next quarter and then pulling together all of the information to do a look back over the last quarter and see where we kind of succeeded and see where we could have done better.
Okay, so it looks very multifaceted, a lot of coordination with other teams and a lot of competing demands, right? Is it stressful?
I mean, it can be, but I love it. This is why I love product. It's never the same thing day by day. I think routine would kill me. I think if I was in a job that it was very routine based, where I knew exactly what I was doing every day, I would be bored out of my mind. So, I mean, it can be when there's lots of competing, demands on your time, but actually that's the part that drives me.
Yeah. All right, never a dull day. So, Cheryl, how did you get from your first leadership role to where you are right now? Tell us a little bit about that journey.
My career has been very meandering, so it's not followed a very linear path. I've kind of followed curiosity and things that I've wanted to do. As far as leadership, so I had gone to Seattle as a kind of product manager, and I was working with this guy, Brian. And he was probably the first person that really recognized, I think you could be doing more than, the role we've got you doing at the moment. So I jumped into a role, the job, we called it president, but looking back, it's probably more of a COO type of role. What did surprise me was I then took some time off, had kids, and I thought that I would be coming back in my career at the same place I left. I was very surprised to be like, burp, burp, no, back down the bottom of the ladder. None of your previous experience counts. And so I kind of made my way back up from product manager through to senior product manager, head of product at BlueChilli. I moved over to director of product at Zip because I wanted to get kind of just that real scale-up experience. I sat in the interim CPO chair for a while there, and now I'm over here at CultureAmp.
Yeah, awesome. And I think you changed countries in that whole process as well, right? Which sort of means giving up your whole network and reputation that you have, right? Do you feel like that was part of the step back?
I mean, in a way, so I had left Australia and I was, I'm not going to, it sounds very arrogant, but I was a very big fish in a small pond. Like the web digital industry in Australia was small enough that I knew most of the players through one or two kind of degrees of separation. I moved to Seattle where I was then kind of a nobody. So I kind of started to build my reputation there. But I mean, I was also in America. So I was in Seattle and LA, and I was always going to be a small fish in a massive, massive pond. So, I had built my own kind of little reputation there. But then I did come back to Australia kind of starting from scratch again. But I think in a way I had that American experience, which also helped really accelerate my career as well.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. And now, how did you get? You talked a little bit about it already. How you got picked as a leader for the first time. But what was it about you that stood out to Brian to say, hey, actually, you can do more? What were you showing already as an individual contributor that sort of showed that leadership potential?
I think what Brian saw in me was my ability to get shit done. So. I think one thing I've always been very good at is to look at something and rather than going, oh, well, that one's not my job, that's somebody else's. It's like, oh, you know what, like the garbage needs taking out. I'll go take the garbage out. Or we need to create something over here. I'll do that. So I always kind of jumped in outside of my remit. And it was because I cared pretty deeply about, solving problems and making good product. So I think Brian saw one thing I had to do in my role there was I had to keep projects moving, which meant keeping engineers accountable. I also had to keep our clients happy, which was a direct odds of kind of keeping the people that I was working with happy, because what clients wanted and the pace at which engineers were working were often at odds with each other. So I think he saw my ability to really kind of juggle those things of like, okay, keeping projects on track, knowing what steps we needed to go through next, knowing, being able to look at, okay, you know what, I think around the corner there's going to be a really big car accident waiting for us. So why don't we, pivot over here? And I think it was probably the ability to juggle lots of things at the same time and keeping lots of things in my head. And, the plates are always spinning and they always came very close to crashing, but I always managed to, I guess, pull it back in at the last minute. So I think that's what in me.
Yeah, awesome. All right. So problem solving, people skills, and just able to juggle a whole lot of things. I think that'll resonate with a lot of leaders. Now, was there an interview with Brian to or any kind of process to make that step, or did he just tap you on the shoulder and was like, "Hey, by the way,
no, we were very close. So we had met at a conference. It was the Web Directions conference here in Sydney.
Yeah.
And we were just talking about digital agency life, what we wanted, the potential that we saw in, the future of the mobile industry and the future of the web, and what everybody else around us was doing wrong and how we knew what the right thing was. And so he eventually was like, hey, let's work together. We're pretty aligned kind of in our work styles. So it happened very organically. I don't think it was ever it was never a formal decision. We were a fairly small company, so we could be very careful about that.
Yeah, it sounds very human compared to a lot of the other processes. That's awesome. Okay, so when you had sort of that first leadership role, who inspired you as a leader, and what sort of traits and things, habits did you try to incorporate into your own leadership style?
It's changed a lot over the course of my career. I think I've always loved working with founder CEOs because they have a particular passion for solving a problem, and they have a drive and they have a vision. And they're amazing at inspiring people and really kind of communicating on that vision. Like I've always sort of said, I work really well paired with a great visionary leader, because I can get things done and they give the vision and I can steer the ship off in that direction once they've kind of highlighted, wow, that's where we're going. So I've always really loved working with founder CEOs. So, like Larry and Pete from Zip, I loved it. They're so passionate. They're so connected to their users. They had a really clear vision of where they wanted to go. I mean, Didier, the CEO of CultureAmp, is amazing because, like, I'm still amazed. He talks to our users every single day. Like, he knows our market so well, and he knows where he wants to go. So I've always found that really inspiring. I think I've worked with some really great leaders lately. So Patrick Collins, who I know you're going to have on your show later on next year. Yeah. I literally joined Zip for, I had an interview with him, and I remember just thinking, I have so much to learn from you about the way that you do product, about the way you lead. I find him a very inspiring leader because he is amazing at having impossibly high standards for you. And you reach them. Like, I've never worked as well as I have because, Patrick really expected a lot from his product people, and he just really raised the bar when it comes to product culture. So I'm very excited for what he's going to be kind of talking to you about next year. But yeah, lots of great leaders.
Awesome. All right. That's very good. In fact, I'm actually surprised that you say, based on, like, we've elephant in the room for everyone. Cheryl and I have worked together at BlueChilli, and I know founders can also be really difficult to work with. I'm not sure if I've heard many people to say they love working with founders, and I can say this, having been a founder myself, we can be impossible, and very difficult to work with. But at the same time, the vision and the drive is hard to get from someone who's just an employee.
Yeah, and it is. And, I will also say founder CEOs drive me nuts. And every time I go work for founder CEO, I'm like, why did I do this to myself again? Because, and especially when you work in product, because often founder CEOs, they are the first product person. They've got a really clear idea of the product in their head. And so that means they're kind of all up in your business when it comes to product. It's a funny dance. But I do much prefer that to, I don't know, working for a bank where you're the 67th CEO and you're sitting in that seat for 4 years until you get your bonus and then you're out to buy your boat. I just don't find that very inspiring. Like, to say, we're a 200-year-old bank. Wow, we're going to still be doing the same thing in 200 years. I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Makes sense. All right. Now, early on in your leadership journey, and we're going to get to you as a leader today, and how you've changed and evolved in a little bit. But early on, when you first made that transition, what were the things that you did well, and what were some of the mistakes that you made early on as well that were sort of a bit harder to come back from?
So I think the things I've always done well, I think I've always been good at creating, I didn't know that this was the term at the time, but like a psychologically safe environment. Like, I've always had feedback from people that say, you make me really comfortable to be myself. I really trust that you've got my back. You kind of give me the autonomy to do the things I need to do, and you're not kind of breathing down my neck and micromanaging me. So I think I've always created an environment where people could be really vulnerable and kind of bring their full selves to work and kind of do their best work. I think I've always, and it probably comes from impatience, but I've always been good at, working in ambiguity and being able to pick a direction and just get started with half a picture. And, if it's a strength and a flaw, it's because I'm actually too impatient to shine a light on the full picture. But that's done me really well when it comes to early stage products, because sometimes you do just need to pick a line and go for it, and you can pivot along the way rather than doing business plans to death for the next 9 months before you've even written a line of code. So I think that has been a strength. I think a lot of the mistakes I made early on are probably quite typical of new leaders. So I know when I first kind of sat in the role, I felt like I needed to have all of the answers. So that meant, if somebody came to me with a problem, it's like, let me solve this for you. I'll just kind of jump in and do it for you. And it was very hard to, I guess, let go early on, just because I thought, if you've come to me with a question, then obviously I need to know the answer. And that probably worked both ways. So kind of with people who reported to me, but also me to my managers, it's like I had to have the answer all the time. And it's probably only with a lot of experience where I've been able to kind of just say, you know what, I don't know, I'll find out, or what do you think, kind of depending on who I'm talking to there. So that was probably a big learning. I think early on, I was not good at managing up. And if anything, I would probably take a little bit of pride in it. And I don't know if you remember kind of the early 2000s, and you'd look around a corporate, you're like, oh, that guy, he just manages up. And it was such a disparaging thing to say about someone. And what the shorthand was, it's like, oh, that guy's just a suck. He's terrible to everybody around him. He's terrible to his peers. He's really political, but he just manages the C-suite really well. And that's taken a while to come to. It's like, oh no, actually managing up is also part of my job, because I need to be communicating really well what I'm doing, what my team's doing. And if I'm not doing that, I'm actually doing a massive disservice to my team. So I kind of early on, I used to have really, really happy teams, and they're like, manager score is really good, and then everybody was, we're shipping great product. But because I wasn't communicating that up at all, it was like we were kind of this invisible team over here. And I used to think that the work would just speak for itself, and I didn't need to get involved in politics, and I didn't need to manage up. And that was probably a big kind of flaw or failure in my thinking there. And it was probably the same with politics. Like, I thought I was above politics because I had integrity, and, I don't need to play that game. And kind of wisdom has taught me that politics is all communication, and it's actually how things happen. And if you want to get things done, particularly at a large org, you do have to engage in politics, because politics is about finding out what people want and how to communicate with them. So yeah, those are probably the failings and the learnings that I've had along the way.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, especially in tech, I find so many people like have this disdain towards the political work that needs to go in, and managing up as well. And you're right. Like, when they've seen a lot of leaders who try to have all the answers, try to do a lot of stuff to keep sort of the team's back clear, and say, well, I don't want to be seen by my team as the person dumping stuff on their desk, etc. But the people that are great at managing up, they do solve problems very effectively. Not always in the service of their team members, or the psychological safety, or the engagement and mental well-being and all these things. But for better or worse, a lot of the time it does lead to results. And unless, that's I guess partially why CultureAmp exists, to sort of shine a light on the people that are achieving, but actually in a fairly toxic way. We need better metrics for that, and put a number on that as well. Sure, the results we can probably put a number on in terms of dollar figures, but what is the dollar figure impact of a team being crushed, being in not a good space, and we don't have that yet. So I found that is just fertile ground for people who are a little bit more ruthless, but at the expense of others. It's a little bit like how we built lots of coal and gas plants before we understood climate change, and we can still look at dollar figures like, well, but it's so much cheaper. Shouldn't we just build one more? It's going to be fine. And we'll kind of suffocate in the end.
A little plug for one of the products I work on, because we do have a manager effectiveness and a leadership effectiveness. But that's where you can see kind of outside of performance reviews, where performance reviews look at impact and the things that you've shipped. But this one really looks at values. Like, does somebody live to their values? Do you feel supported by your manager? Does your manager care deeply about you? So it's a way of getting that real well-rounded view of someone outside of just the managing up, or however we're calling it.
Yeah, great. So yeah, I firmly believe this is actually a really important part of being a leader, of leaving your team in a better space, and it's so much more sustainable for an organization. So yeah, awesome. Glad to hear you guys are doing something about it. Now tell me about, leadership comes with, even if you empower others to make decisions. You still have to make a lot of decisions, a lot of tough calls. And I think, especially over the last year, a lot of leaders had to make really tough calls on who gets let go, who gets made redundant, which projects are we going to kill, what impact is that going to have, and also sometimes who gets promoted, etc. What has been the hardest decision you've had to make?
I mean, to your point, it's about letting people go. So I have had a few cases where I have worked with people who they just weren't the right fit for the company, for the role they were in. In all of the cases, we'd gone through a process of saying, these are the expectations of your role, and these are the key competencies, and here are the areas for improvement. But ultimately, they were just not in the right environment that would be the most supportive for their ways of working. So I have had to let people go, and it is always distressing. Like it's, I'm sure kind of everybody who's done this has done this, but you keep this very neutral face in the meeting, and every time you go home and cry, because it's like, it doesn't matter. You could look at numbers on the spreadsheet, but ultimately we're talking about humans. They have their own home lives, they've got their personal lives. It's a big, horrible decision to make, and it's one I don't think anybody ever takes lightly. So yeah, I mean, I think those are always just the very human side of it not working out has always been really tough. Like I will never get used to it. I hope I don't have to do it too much again. I'm sure it's kind of part of my future at some point, but no, it's just never a nice decision.
Yeah, and I think it's gotten, I don't know how you feel, it's gotten even harder over the last couple of years, where like before, when things were going up and tech talent was in demand, we could say, all right, well, hopefully I'm actually helping that person find a role ultimately that's going to be a much better fit for them, where they're going to be happier and where they're going to be appreciated a lot more for who they are. But with all the redundancies consistently going on in tech, the part of the decision is, all right, well, this person might not be able to pay their home loan at some point, and there's just not much out there. Have you found that, and have you had chats with other people about it?
Yeah, I mean, this one's probably more of a kind of talking with friends in the industry, but it is a really tough market out there. Like I know of people who have been looking for a new role for kind of 9 months, 10 months. Particularly as people are getting more senior as well, the roles are just kind of harder to come by. So yeah, I've definitely had a lot of conversations with people who have been looking for work. Yeah, it's just a really, really tough market for kind of design leaders, product leaders, probably engineering leaders less so, but at the moment definitely product design. I think there's probably and you and I have had this conversation a few times, but there's an overarching shift in product going on at the moment, which also makes it a really hard time to be looking for work, because nobody's really hiring at senior levels.
Yeah, it's product management is dead, and all the founder CEOs should get back into making all the decisions, according to Brian Chesky. I mean, bless him, he's very, very, very smart, but yeah, he's built an org chart around him as a leader, which is key man risk, but arguably it can work, and it worked for Apple in many ways, and for some other organizations. But yeah, I have the feeling it's just the hype curve, right? We reached peak product management a year or two ago. Now it's all going to go down, and it's going to get a lot more sustainable,
and it will level up.
Measured. Yeah. Okay. Well, all right. So mistakes, hard decisions, and what you mentioned, like a lot of it resonates, and with all the leaders I've worked with and seen and mentored, etc., it's like a lot of it is so common. I think I had one conversation where with a guy, great guy, but worked with him, and the thing that he was most worried about, he didn't have to go through making the redundancy calls. He was like, what if my team members ask for a raise? And I don't know how to respond to that, and what to say, and how that whole process even works from being a manager. And so I found it's exactly what you mentioned in these kind of situations that a lot of people struggle with, and that's sort of why scalable leaders exist. So shameless plug at this point. The core pillars of our support system that we build is sandbox sessions where people can talk through these challenges, the tough decisions in a safe environment, sort of bypass the mistakes that are hard to come back from. It's 27 support, like on Stack Overflow, and as a playbook with a set of principles that are built on the experience and insights from people who worked in leadership positions at Google and Atlassian and Sendel, and one of them, and we know her both, has just been selected a global like top 100 HR leader. Executive coaches have been part of that process, and so it's all principles that ultimately help you make those tough decisions a lot faster and a lot easier, and work on your mindset on how to approach these situations so that you're not going to burn bridges, but still deliver really good results for your organizations. And so whatever leadership program you join, whether your company has one or not, I found the most important thing is actually, because that gap into leadership is so much larger, is to have a strategy for how to grow as a leader, and how to grow as a leader yourself, independent of the training program that maybe your company has that's very compliance driven, and having your own back on that journey. And you can actually get one for free. Anyone who's on the call, you can just head to scalableleaders.com/call, book in a time, and we'll get you, no strings attached, we'll get you a strategy for how to grow as a leader. So let's look at who you are as a leader today. And I know a lot of people go through quite a journey of, you've already alluded to some of the things of, like wanting to avoid the political work, to actually knowing that is just part of the job and part of getting results. Who are you today in terms of the good and the bad? What is it like to work with you? What does your team come to expect from you?
So it's funny. So I've been kind of doing this for close to 30 years now. I still have crazy imposter syndrome. So I want to list off all the bad things first, because I'm like, oh, I do this badly and I'm really insecure about this. But I will start with the good, just to calm myself down. I think, I mentioned it before. I think my early strengths are still my strengths. Like I'm very good at, leading with trust and autonomy, seeing the best in everybody, being able to pull out people's particular strengths, particularly, I have done well working with neurodiverse people before, because they often have these very hidden strengths that other people don't necessarily take the time to uncover. So I think that's kind of my superpower. I can work with a lot of people and really find those hidden strengths and kind of bring them up to the next level, and kind of challenge them in a comfortable place to take them to where they're really, leading themselves. I think I'm, really good at encouraging collaboration. Navigating change is one where I definitely, probably because I work in such chaos, it's like my comfortable place. So I think, being able to lead through change and through transition is probably a strength. And, then on the product side, which is probably less leadership, but being able to see a product and bring it to life from nothing. I guess I've got a lot of experience in that. Where I think the bad, I think back to Patrick when I worked with him, and one thing I really learned from him, like he kind of has this philosophy, whether stated or not, he's like, I don't need to be liked. I just need to be respected. And I'm like, oh my God, because I am such a people pleaser that I'm like, oh, that's revolutionary for me. Like, what do you mean you don't need to be liked? But it's amazing because of that, he's able to say, this is the bar at which I expect from you. This is how you get there. Now go and meet it. And I would like to be more like that, I think. So when I kind of look at my way of leadership, it's very nurturing and it's very trusting. But I would like to have a little bit more of the, but I'm actually going to challenge you and make you really uncomfortable to kind of take you up to the next level. I would love to be better at that side of things. So I'm kind of baby stepping my way into that. I think, I talked before, I do really well being paired with these amazing vision visionaries. I don't feel like I'm a visionary myself. I feel like I can see 2 to 5 years in the future, and I work with people who can see 20, 30 years into the future. Like I work with people who are like, fuck it, we're going to revolutionize banking. And I'm like, oh, because I know how to, make you do that thing with your debit card that you couldn't do before. So I would love to go, I would love to work on that a little bit more. And I feel like, as a leader, that's probably, I'm not as big a visionary as I would like to be from looking at other kind of founder CEOs. And then I guess around communication, like I think I'm a very good verbal communicator and I'm very good at flying by the seat of my pants, but I am not good at sitting down and writing documentation and getting thoughts that are in my head very clear for other people to read. It's something I'm working on. I know it comes up all the time in my kind of 360 reviews. It's like, I know I'm working on it, but I know I do definitely need to work harder at that side of things.
Interesting.
I remember talking to you, Ben, when you and I worked together, and I was like, fuck, I need to get better at whiteboarding. Like I can see these things in my head, but I just cannot communicate it down in a way that helps, people who are very visual thinkers. Like how do I translate that? So I'm still working on it.
It's interesting. If I take a step back from what you've mentioned, there's a pattern there, right? Which is we all have, we discuss this in the sandbox sessions all the time, where we all have our preferred leadership style of who we are authentically and sort of aspire to be, and we want to be that person most of the time. But then there's a particular type of person, our team or stakeholder, where that approach just does not work, and or they will take advantage of it, or we're just going to hit the wall, right? And so actually the journey of becoming a more well-rounded leader and adapting, depending on the situation or the person you've got in front of you, to different styles, and yes, communicating in different ways, it's endless. And I think that's why product management and leadership is actually, they have a lot of things in common, because it is endless and you have to adapt to so many different people and situations that you can never be perfect at all of it. It's a journey, and it will take the rest of our lives, and we'll still get into situations that are going to be challenging. But thank you for sharing.
I'll share a funny story with you. So when I was at Zip, it was during the lockdown, and so everything was crazy. I had 3 kids at home. I was homeschooling. I was taking the kids somewhere in the car, but I also had like a 30-person meeting where we were talking about trade-offs for planning, and it was dependency mapping and everything else. And so I was in the car, the kids are all screaming behind me. And there was the point at which I wanted to say something about dependencies. And so I'd kind of hovered over the mute button and I warned the kids. I was like, everyone shut up, I'm about to speak. And then I looked, I'm like, am I on mute? And everyone's like, no. And I was like, did I just say that to 30 people in a meeting? And everyone's like, yeah. What was amazing to me was like, I speak that way to my kids. I don't speak that way to my colleagues.
Yeah.
I thought that would be like fireable offense. Cheryl told everyone to shut up. And everyone was like, oh no, we were just waiting to hear what you were going to say. I was like, I think I could actually be harsher than I generally am. Like, I'm always like, oh, please, keep in mind. I'm like, I can just say, everyone shut up, I want to speak. And they will listen.
Yeah.
So good little lesson in there.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Okay. Now I've got a few more questions, but just because I know a bunch of people are watching online, if you have any questions, do jot them down into the comments, and we'll get to them in a second. But you can start flooding the channel if you like. Okay. So you mentioned something interesting there, which is a great gateway: remote work, hybrid work, etc. Everything has changed since COVID, and I know there's a bunch of people out there who want to try to change it back to the way it was before. And without trying to take an opinion on that, how have you adapted to like your leadership and the way you lead and engage your team in a setting where, well, probably most days you have at least one person working remotely?
So I'm probably a little bit of an exception, because I've been doing remote work since kind of 2007. So when I used to work with Brian, he was based in Seattle. I was here in Sydney. I don't know if you remember the days of Skype. And then once I came back to Australia, I was living in Newcastle, commuting down to Sydney kind of once every 2 weeks. So I was remote then as well. So I think what works is, doing a lot of working out loud on Slack or Teams or wherever your work is happening. We've even got like the little kind of working out loud or thinking out loud emoji. So just really kind of communicating those thoughts when you're not sitting in an office where you can talk to people. I know at BlueChilli, we took a remote first approach to meetings that I really appreciated as a remotie, because it just meant if you always had a Zoom link on the invites, even if we were in the office, we would tend to jump on our separate computers. And that really helps, I guess, even the playing field a little bit. Like it used to be kind of pre-2020, people would forget to put Zoom links, or you would just be this one head kind of in the boardroom and 30 people would be in the boardroom. So I feel like that's shifting, and I feel like it's just very deliberate communication. Like I'm now working with kind of people in different time zones, as well as kind of a lot of us being remote. So I guess it's just about being a little bit more deliberate, and having a very casual style definitely helps there, because it does allow for that working out loud. Like, not you need to go create a PRD for us to have a conversation. It's like, no, let's work out loud on Slack or in Miro or wherever it is, and just kind of make sure we're on the same page there with our thoughts.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And kudos to CultureAmp as a company and is still embracing that. I know a lot of organizations are trying to pull everything back. Okay. Awesome. Now, even though you can work remote and from home and everything, leadership is still an inherently stressful role, right? And it takes a lot of, and that's the other thing we talk about a lot, sort of with new leaders. It takes a lot of self-management to actually become a successful, impactful leader. And I always say you can't really lead people effectively before you can lead yourself and make sure you contain your emotions in certain situations. But with all the stress and still stress hangover from COVID and all the changes that happened, I see a lot of people, pretty much everyone, still being like the baseline stress level is a lot higher for people. So how do you manage ultimately the demands of that role? And you've got so many people in your team wanting to be taken care of, and you've got managers and peers, etc., like wanting you to deliver results, etc. Yeah, how do you manage yourself to be in a good place to do all of that?
I mean, I think, one, the understanding your job will never be done. Like, it doesn't matter if you work 24 hours a day, you're never going to get all of the things you want done. So just give up on the idea that you can get all of the way through your to-do list. I think it's about, this relentless prioritization. And I was talking before about the spinning plates. It's like, okay, what are the 3 most important things that you can be working on? There's all the kind of call it the hippy dippy stuff about, you got to look after your body first. So it's like, you stay fit, go for walks, do yoga, do meditation, whatever it is, just kind of stay physically fit yourself. I have really helped from having a bit of an informal network of kind of peers and other product people we're all at very similar levels. So that's really helped, just being able to kind of talk through some of the problems and to know I'm not alone out there. This is not a kind of me problem. This is a everybody problem, or actually maybe that one is a me problem. But just having a cohort of people that you can bounce ideas off has really, really helped. This is going to sound kind of silly. I've got a looking backwards file where every time someone says something nice or gives me feedback, I copy it into a Notion. And that also helps sometimes, where it's like, if I'm having a down day, I'm like, oh my God, I'm terrible at my job, I'm the worst. And, being able to pull up this file, it's like, oh no, people have said these really nice things to me about, my leadership style or about managing them. Yeah. And it's just nice to kind of like, okay, I'm not truly terrible. There is some good in there. So I think just kind of having these touch points to look back on.
That's awesome. I really love that, because a lot of the time we get, depending on the situation, we just get flooded with a lot of things, like people not being happy with us, but knowing that actually the world is a lot more balanced than we perceive it sometimes. That's so important. That's awesome. And I'd second, by the way, the just having a group of peers. And it's part of like the support system that we designed for scalable leaders. And what I've heard people say is this is just like business therapy a little bit, right? Knowing that you're not the only one going through this crap, but it's very common. And yeah, then being able to share, well, how did everyone else sort of try to solve that and what were the results? That can be really helpful. Awesome. Now, you've hired other leaders.
Mm-hmm.
You were part of the interview process. How do you interview? Like, what is like one of the questions you love asking for leaders that you hire to sort of understand how they are as leaders and what to expect, when they come into the business, what to expect from them?
So some of my favorite questions that I think tell a lot about a person, it's like, tell me about a product or a project that you've worked on that's failed. And then really digging into the detail of that. And that is to see, one, what is somebody's resilience like? Two, can they embrace failure? Have they taken a learning from failure? Have they thought about what they would have done differently the next time? Because you kind of dig into the detail of like, well, looking back, what could have changed? So that's always a favorite. I've always hired based on curiosity. So when you say to somebody, what are you learning at the moment and what's your learning style, for example, that's a great way of really uncovering, what makes somebody tick. And you can't sort of say, what do you do in your spare time? But it's really understanding, is somebody driven by curiosity? Do they look at something and say, well, that's just the way the world is, kind of move on? Or do they really want to uncover the root cause and the why behind, the way the world is? So yeah, probably those two things, like really looking at how resilient you are, how you work in ambiguity. And just, are they driven by curiosity? And then the rest are kind of detail, like, is somebody very data focused, or which parts of, I guess, the product triangle, octagon, whatever it is, which parts are really driven by? But I mean, as a leadership core, it would be those curiosities, embracing failures.
Yeah. I found curiosity just such an undervalued skill or trait in general. And I think in tech, you just can't get away without it. And a lot of the hiring techniques and interview practices, they don't necessarily originate in tech, but any decent engineer, any decent like designer, product manager to really like be set up for success, like medium term, and even onboarding fast into an organization, and then also, of course, for the leadership transition down the line, you can't get away without a certain set of curiosity. Just relying on what you know today isn't going to take you very far. But it's such an important leadership trait as well. And you talked about neurodiversity, and I think you and I had plenty of conversations about inclusive leadership and creating a good environment for all types of people to excel in a team. And curiosity is like the gateway actually into understanding the people and how to get the most out of them, and why you might see certain behavior, where it's coming from. It's not now like with bad intentions. It's not like that someone is just a bad person. It's like, oh, okay, hold on, there's actually something triggering them. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. It's just such an important thing.
Yeah, and it's figuring out the why, because so many companies, the way they do things are just the way they've done them because somebody did it that way, 12 years ago, and it's just never changed. And I think part of leadership is really uncovering well, why are we doing things the way we do them? And is there a better way of doing them? And not just kind of within your own sphere, but how can you make the company more efficient? And if it is kind of banging down a wall that's over there, then, that's what you've got to do.
Awesome. All right, now last question from me before we get into questions from the floor. And thanks already for posting a bunch. What's the best advice that you have for emerging leaders, like the ones on the cusp of getting into leadership role, or just having made that transition?
I mean, mentoring is a huge one. So I've always had very unofficial, I've never gone through kind of formal mentoring programs, but I've always had, leaders that I admire in my circles that I've been able to kind of talk to and bounce ideas off and say, well, where do I need to, focus my energy? Where do you think are some of the gaps that I have in my kind of my skills and my capabilities? So having people who have gone through that path earlier, that's where I've learned the most, more so than, I've read all of the books, but it's like actually either seeing it in action or talking to people about how they've dealt with situations. That's probably been the most valuable thing that I could have done in my career. And it's also like, it's a bit of a sad thing, but networking is probably where I'm going to say 80% of the jobs happen. It's from people not from kind of responding to a job ad. And so I think, the more people that and the more people that you can learn from, the better off you're going to be in your career, because they're going to remember, when a role comes up, oh, hey, I remember I spoke to Cheryl like 3 years ago and she was looking for this. And I don't know, it's sad that that's the way the world works, but it is the way the world works. So I think kind of, having as many people in your sphere and, being able to learn from them has been huge for me.
Yeah, and it's interesting. That's both internal and external, right? And where sort of internally where managing up comes in again, which we've got a whole module on in the program. But yeah, no, that's right. Awesome. Thank you so much, Cheryl. Now we're gonna open it up, and Richard posted something asking about product in particular. Where do you see product going in 2024 with, I think you just said the whole, like, we should think about how this works in our place. And, is this really the right pattern? I think that's all going out of the window at the moment with, well, Airbnb got rid of product. Shouldn't we do the same thing? What do you reckon in your crystal ball we can expect?
It's been a roller coaster of a year. I think two things. One, the whole death of product management has been massively overblown. However, we do have to undergo a transition as an industry. Product management has always just been a bit of a catch-all phrase. Back when I kind of started my career, we were producers. And I think we do have to undergo an evaluation of, is what we're doing working? Are we being the most efficient? There are some companies where product managers are product owners and they're in charge of the delivery. And there's some where, I don't know, they're kind of just the roadblocks. So I do think we need to take a look at ourselves as an industry and say, where are we adding the most value? I think working in Australia, I think product management is more disconnected from the commercial outcomes than perhaps product management I've seen in America, where you're like managing the P&L. And, that's, I do think we need to evolve to be so much more commercially minded than we are at the moment. I think, we do a lot of delivery, but we're not as strong on the commercials as we could be. So yeah, I think it's going to undergo a evolution rather than a revolution, but I think it's warranted. This industry is only 20 years old. It kind of became the hot thing 4 years ago. Lots of people came flocking to product management because it seemed like the sexy thing to do, and then we just need to have the evolution from there.
I agree. I've run a product meetup in Sydney for a really long time and been a big evangelist for better practices, but there's almost a disconnect as well between, like, a lot of the stuff we read about product management initially was all like based off like the United States or like the Silicon Valley Bay Area in particular, and trying to translate that here, where a lot of the ultimate leaders in an organization are not from product, are not necessarily even from tech, is really difficult. And I found we almost get shoved into that area of, well, I want a button here, so you guys just tell the engineers and do that, and that provides very little value. Like the way a lot of product managers had to work, honestly, I could see why it's easy to make those roles redundant and not feel an impact for a while. But the whole lot of customer focus was about trying to make better business decisions. But I agree with you, in Australia, we haven't always sort of made that step, and that's been holding us back here. So yeah, I've got a similar view. All right, cool. Richard, I hope that answers your question. Now we've got a question from Mark. I guess it's not so much a question as a comment, but maybe we can chat about that. So Didier from CultureAmp hired Mark about 100 years ago, which I guess tells us something about both of their age. And one of his questions, I think he actually Didier mentioned that in a bunch of interviews, is what is the job you want after this one during the interview process? And Mark says he's adopted it since, and it sort of shows ambition of the candidate, like based on the response. Did Didier or like whoever interviewed you at CultureAmp, do they still ask that?
I don't know that they asked that one directly, actually, but we did, we've had a lot of conversations about my own career trajectory. So that does sound like the sort of question we ask, because it does uncover, a lot of the motivations of somebody and where they want to grow and also how you as their manager can help them along that journey to get to that role. So, super great question.
Yeah, I found something like that creates or in most cases, creates a lot of team engagement, right? Knowing that you as a manager have their back and you've got no illusions. They're going to leave at some point and you want to help them no matter what. But I will say, I have been in a situation where that question was extremely poorly received, where someone then construed a case that I was trying to get rid of them. I asked it when I joined a team, and I asked that to my whole team, what are they working towards? And it was someone who I think was maybe a little bit reluctant to change and all these things, and took offense at me asking that question. So, but a lesson learned about leadership styles, right, and how they resonate with people. Right? Say again.
And building trust first. Which is
one of the mistakes I'd like to go back on, but we live and we learn. Hey. All right. Well, if there are any more questions online, keep them coming. Otherwise, I'm going to ping it over to Cheryl for the second. So first of all, thank you so much for joining, for sharing, for being so candid and open. Is there anything that's on your mind that you'd want to share with the audience who's watching now or later? Anything you'd want the ecosystem to know?
I mean, I have definitely felt that it's been a tough year in product. And I think before we jumped this call, I was like, I'm really tired. I'm really tired. I think from conversations that I've been having, I feel like a lot of people in product are really tired. And to your point earlier, Ben, it's like a little bit of a hangover from 2020 that we probably never quite processed. It's the demands of all of our different roles. It's kind of the anxiety of working in tech in 2023 and not really knowing kind of, will next year get better or get worse? So yeah, just I think if you're feeling like that, we're all in a similar boat. So just go easy on yourself and reach out. And I'm always happy to talk to anybody about kind of what they're going through. But I'm struggling a little bit at the moment, just in terms of like energy levels and staying super motivated. So just go easy on yourself as we get to the end of the year.
Awesome. I heard Bill Gates the other day say that he reckons we can all go to a 3-day week soon with the transition to AI. I mean, that would be fantastic, but I fear that a lot of companies are going to struggle to catch up with that for a while. And again, put a number on the higher productivity over 3 or 4 days versus just having people having bums on seats for 5 days.
Well, do you remember back in the 60s when they said we had computers and all this automation, and that means we'll have all of this spare time because the computers will do our job, and we're working harder than our parents ever did. So the idea that we're going to get more leisure time, I'm going to take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, well, yeah, we'll see. I think, I mean, fingers crossed, Bill. I've got my fingers crossed. All right, we've got one last question from Gaurav. Why are so many companies not adopting US ladders and just Aussie companies predominantly hire senior PMs? And I'll second that, Gaurav. I've seen when I first came here, it's like every single job ad that I see asks for senior product managers. Like, people think that senior PMs grow on trees, but also people that I've seen in senior PM roles aren't necessarily, I mean, one person's opinion, but how I would define what a senior PM should be capable of. But Sagar's question is, we hire senior PMs regardless of scope or size and remit, etc. Do you reckon it'll change? When will it change?
So I've got a maybe unpopular answer in that I think the difference between working in America and working in Australia is I see companies in Australia are very risk averse. They're very they're kind of fearful of innovation, and that they will do baby steps of innovation, but we have such a fear of failure here that we don't stick our necks out, and call it tall poppy syndrome, call it I don't know, ridiculous mortgage sizes. Like, I don't know what it is, but we don't take risks the way Americans take risks. Like, American companies will go all in, and they will be like, you tried it, you failed, great, here's your next project. Wow, you failed so well at that. Here's an even bigger project to fail at. Kind of paraphrasing there. But they seem to accept a larger tolerance for risk-taking, knowing that it may lead nowhere. And I don't see that in Australia. And so why are we not adopting it? I think it's just risk aversion.
It's interesting, right? Like, in the US, you can start a company, you can burn $100 million, and you can still come out all right on the other side, and people will still want to work with you. And that doesn't always exist in other cultures, right? It's like, well, it was $100 million. How could you have possibly failed having, all the money in the world?
They're giving that $100 million to the white dudes. They're not giving it to the women or the people of color. Let's be clear. So white dudes can pay over and over.
We'll need a whole other conversation on that. But I agree. It's there's with a lot of the founders, there's also a certain amount of entitlement and and bro culture that's probably gonna keep the wrong people on the steering wheel sometimes. Okay. So I guess we didn't necessarily answer Gar's question. Will it ever change?
I will give it a little bit of a plug in that CultureAmp, if it's helpful for you. We have a career pathway competency ladder for product people. You can Google it, or I can find you afterwards and send you the link. But that does outlay kind of, this is what an associate PM is: PM, senior, lead, director, VP, and CPO. So I don't know if that's helpful for you to sort of say, well, is this really senior or is this not? Because this seems kind of over here or over here. But yeah, I don't know. I think it is really helpful to see it laid out of like, what is a senior PM versus a director versus a lead.
Yeah, I see a couple more comments there. So we might have to take that discussion online, because I know people are almost going to be done with lunch and we want to wrap this up for everyone's 1 p.m. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining. It's been an incredible hour. And one thing I want to say is it's really yours, everyone who joined, who's watching this after. It's your curiosity and dedication to mastering leadership that's going to be a huge asset to this ecosystem. So keep that going. We've got 3 more fireside chats scheduled for the rest of the year. The next one is with David Wang, ex-group product manager at Linktree, one of the fastest growing certainly Australian startups. And we've got in the weeks after Andreas Mamaris from Domain, and we've got Harry Waiputra from High Pages, the CPO there, publicly listed company, so that should be interesting as well. And Harry had a string of very senior roles at well-known companies. So the links to those talks, I'll put them in the comments if they're not already there. So join now if you to make sure you don't miss out. If there is a leader in the ecosystem that you want to hear from and want to see a fireside chat like this with, just mention them. Let me know so I can reach out. And last but not least, if you need help with your leadership journey, remember you can schedule a free session to work out a strategy for your journey just at scalableaders.com/call. That's it, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I hope I see you on the next one. Cheers all.